Artwork, critiques, Photoshop files, and reference sheets are all available on my Patreon. And save for date, guys, as Draw with Mikey episode 100 will be live on YouTube on Saturday the 22nd of September. Further details to follow. Well, hello there guys and girls, my name's Mikey, welcome back to my room, and it's time for another tutorial. And today we're going to be talking about how to map those body curves for your voluptuous female anime and manga characters. But as ever with our tutorials, guys, bear in mind that mapping out the curves of the body and running through the examples that we're going to do today is really something that you can apply to kind of figure studies in general for pretty much any art style. So don't be scared to follow along. If you want, grab yourself some paper. I'm using a super cheap disposable printer paper, but I do have a few sheets of it on the desk so that the surface is relatively okay to use. A super cheap disposable mechanical HB pencil as ever. You don't need to wait for the good equipment. And I do have a scrap of paper down just so that my hand can rest on it without really kind of transferring any greases or oils onto my working page. And also, bonus extra, right up here is a new webcam, everybody. I'm using a slightly different camera to test out if I can just improve the recording quality of our tutorials in general. I suspect already that nobody can tell the difference, so that's a good spend of money. Anyway guys, let's dive in and talk about those female bodies. Now, as ever, I'm going to just start up with an example. Let's actually start with the back for once, shall we? Where I'm going to imagine the curving spine line of our particular character somewhere around here. And I have, as you guys probably know, done all sorts of tutorials on the basic building blocks that I like to use when actually mapping out and building up these characters. And they are all available in my tutorials playlist. So we might skip a few very basic things. But much like my other tutorials on mapping the hips and waist and so on, we're going to build up a lot of what we already know about using these body curves, as well as our shoulder lines and our hip lines, and making them a little bit contrapposto, just so that they balance out quite nicely. So I'm actually imagining we've got a neck of our character right up here, and I'm just going to start to roughly map out this general elliptical curve, which is going to make up a chest area for this particular character. Again, I'm trying to make my construction lines a little bit darker than I might do usually, just so that it's clear enough for you guys. And then a much flatter sideways ellipse is going to work fairly nicely to be the hips of this particular female character, like so. And then I can just actually slightly redefine this spine line. I understand that it's going to be curving round the back. It's going to kind of sweep in with that curve right down to the lumbar area, where it then kind of hooks back out towards the bum area and the overall bucket shape of the hips. So let's go ahead and map some shoulders onto this character as well. And unlike the other tutorials we've done when it comes to the different body sections of our characters, especially the hips ones, I thought it's going to help you guys to make sure we include just a tiny bit of leg and a tiny bit of arm as well, just so that you can start to, with your own work at home, really connect all of these different areas together. So these shoulder circles are in, just fair and just fair, but because we're looking at the back, don't forget that you've got all sorts of things going on with the shoulder blades or the scapula, which you can kind of basically imagine as being a kind of rough triangular shape that goes kind of in towards the middle of the back or further out, depending on where the motion of the arms are coming up from the shoulders. But I'm just going to put a line marking in there for the moment, understanding that this shoulder anyway is actually going to be connected a bit more firmly to the back by this huge kind of area of the lateral muscles as well. So just up here and just up there. And again, maybe this other shoulder blade's much further around this part of the back as well. So I'm just going to put a little bit of an indicating line here, and imagine that this arm is maybe up, off and out in this direction. So I will just get an arm to actually come off of this character really quickly, just like so. And then coming back in here, and I'm going to give it that bump right here that shows that the shoulder isn't a perfect circle in its own right, even though we do start like that, but it does actually kind of pull down and go off and into the arm, reaching down almost into a point like that. And then on this side of things you've got the biceps, and on this side of things you've got the muscles of the tricep. So again, all of this stuff is kind of connected in these different ways. It's nice just to start to get a feel for that. So my other arm is probably also going to be forward on this character, so I don't need to worry there. And coming down towards the hips area, we're going to build up that kind of bucket-like shape by just firming up this outer edge here, and this curve here. You'll notice because I've got the bum area coming slightly off towards our right hand side, I'm putting loads more curve into this section of the hip as it just sways out here, and making sure that I've got a nice bit of divot in to really just accentuate a slightly slimmer waist on this character, even though this character is going to be relatively curvy nonetheless. Now as we come up here into our kind of lateral area over the side, I'm not going to put too much curve in here because of the angle that we're looking onto this character. Just a little bit of a bump there, and then really everything is sweeping up into this rib cage here on this side, and then I can just kind of imagine I've got a good bit of boob, which I indicate with a not perfect circle, but imagine a balloon that's full of water is just going to bulge a little bit more on the bottom than it is on the top. On the top it's going to hang a little bit more, which allows me to kind of actually get a bit of a slightly straighter curve coming up there, and much more of a curve down on this side here. So on the back side of things as well, we can imagine that we've got round here in this lumbar region the superior posterior iliac spine. So what's going on there is that around about here and around about here you get your bum dimples, which is where loads of muscle groups meet together and hook onto the back of the hip bones. It's a really great area, but we're just going to indicate by putting two little lines in there, and then just think about the bum for our character. Now again, we're a little bit side on, but also facing towards the back. So I want to just imagine where the middle part of that bum curve is going to be. And it's probably going to start out here as a relatively straightish line, but then it is going to hook back in. And it's going to hook in sharper as we go, a bit more of a golden ratio shape. So I'm just going to imagine a nice big zone for that, and then just get that curve in, sweeping nicely here, and then stopping around about here, like so, and then pretty much just mimicking what we've just done on the outside edge as well, but coming with that curve a little bit further around, just like so. And then where we've got our solid part of the hip zone here, we've got our bum curve here, and I'm imagining just both legs of each character really basically going down, nothing too special in this instance, but it does allow me then to sweep down here, nice and solid, come back in here from the inside back edge of the bum, and this is a relatively straight line, but there is still a little bit of pull just down here as well before we come in, like so. And very similar on this curve of things, this leg is going to sweep from about this part of the bum here, also just come down in as it makes its way towards the back part of the kneecap. So I'm just going to stop these legs off around about here, just so that all of our images are going to fit nicely in the page. And I'm just going to come back up and actually just talk about these surfaces, because what we've just done here is covered a very quick example of drawing a torso for an anime character and having a look at the back. But what I think is really useful about mapping these surfaces is it's going to help you with understanding the directions of limbs, where your foreshortening will be, where your shadowing is going to be, and really where the surface area of the skin is at any given point. So I do recommend, if you want to make mapping out a bit of a thing whilst you're doing maybe your rough draft lines for characters, or just understanding the body form a bit more, get that middle center line for the spine down here, down here. I'm going all the way fairly lightly, just so that I don't join it perfectly with the bum, but to kind of indicate I am mapping that entire area down there. And then with the hips and other areas, I do like to remember that we've got all sorts going on around here, and then popping back up around here. So this is a good line to indicate where the bum is going up into the back of the hip areas. This might be where we've got all of the fats and muscles of the bum, but this zone here is our kind of solid hip zone still, regardless of all of that. So up around here as well, on this side. So all of that's fairly solid there, but where this leg's kind of joining on as well, that's where you're going to get all of your movement around about this joint here. Obviously inside there is where you've got the sockets of the femurs going into the hip joints. And then up here as well, when we're looking from the back side of things, these lateral muscles tend to sweep down to around about this point here. And then you've got your kind of obliques for your character being this zone here, like so, and up on this side as well, just a little bit on that edge. Laterals on this side as well. And then over on this side, you've got all of the side muscles that sort of knit into the rib cage as well. So we won't worry too much there. But when it comes to the boobs on a character, and we'll get a bit more detailed by looking a bit more front on in just a second, it doesn't help to, or it doesn't hurt, I should say, to also just X map out this. Now, we see from the lower back side, so we're not going to get much of a top center line of this boob, but we are still going to pretty much see where the sideways lateral line is going to be. It's something like that sweeps things down there. And then remember, you can always just put a few lines here to measure out where you've got your thin hip points, your slightly wider hip points, and also your legs. You've got the direction of the surface of the rough cylindrical shape that makes up these legs, but you do also want to map the curve of the surface, and that's also going to tell you, with this slight amount of curve, is this going towards us as a viewer, is it going away from us as a viewer, and it's also going to help us understand later on when you actually turn it into your piece where the shading is, where the light sources are going to bounce off these different areas, all sorts of important things. Now up here as well, if you need to just start to really point a few things out, this whole shoulder joint, or this shoulder blade I should say, the scapular area, is kind of a winged triangular shape that just comes in on the inside there. Don't worry about defining it too much with your characters unless they've got very low body fat for them, as most of the musculature up around the back of the neck and in this area are going to be your traps anyway, which do fill up most of this area up here, and also all over here. So your traps fill up the middle, you've got shoulder blades on the outsides, and very similar thing with the arm. I'm just going to indicate its direction and its surface where it goes away from us. I'm just going to map that over the shoulder as well, just like so. So splitting up the actual body into these different groupings, just when you draw it as your draft as well, is actually going to build up and help you understand, okay, in that case then, if I'm going to twist this character or draw it in a different position, I do know what these kind of different formats and blocks are going to be. So let's go ahead and test exactly that theory. Let's go, I want to fit ideally 4 pictures in, so I'm going to go a little bit smaller and we're going to look a little bit more front on. But we've done loads of front on before, so this should be relatively familiar territory. So let's mix it a little bit and go low angle, or ever so slightly low. So once again, I want to have a body that's going to maybe just be about here, again not too big this time, and my shoulder line is going to go perhaps here, and the hip line is going to be something like so, and I'm imagining us looking from a slightly low angle looking up. So I'm going to get in our elliptical shape to represent the rib cage once more, and you'll see where I've got between the shoulder and the hips, I'm just going basically a little bit more than halfway down as a joint, and then down here as well we've got our sideways ellipse, which gets to be our hips. We'll just think about an egg drop shape going down here, and then just a slightly flattened sideways block over there. And when we're kind of working out our angles for looking up at things, sometimes it doesn't hurt to go in and think about those box shapes. Sure, this is a big curve, but if this was an egg that sat inside a box that was perfectly egg-sized, then what I'm kind of imagining is that I'm looking at things a little bit like this right now. So we're actually getting some of that underside edge, some of that side. So we come up here, and again I'm keeping this bit relatively light. And then as for the hips, normally they bucket a bit towards us with a good posture, but because of our low angle, I'm actually going to leave them being pretty much straight up in this instance, from our viewpoint at least, something like so. Okay, so that just helps us understand those little bits, but again, if I centerline this particular curve and just hook up to represent where the bottom of your ribs naturally curve off of that shape, again, that alone really helps us with that form. So let's just center that up a little bit. There we go. My new setup means I'm looking at everything on my screen upside down, which is just really blowing my mind right now. So let's get some shoulder circles into this character. One just over here, and then one on this side, which we can actually see, something like that over here. And we're going to have one arm maybe up and the other arm just maybe off, something like that. And in this instance, with this up arm, you can imagine again, we've got that cylinder shape just going up and away, and it is growing out of the shoulder. Now, as I mentioned, this shoulder shape around here really kind of covers and wraps round a lot of this area, but when we see it from the underside, you're going to see it a bit more like this, a line that grows up from the chest and then sure wraps over the top part, but from our perspective down here, we're going to see a shape do something a little bit more like that. And then you've got your extra areas, muscles of the neck and so on coming off here on our character, vaguely in the middle. And then from here you've got the collarbone, which is a line that's going to come here, dip in the middle where the collarbone center onto the top of a rib cage, and then probably sweep up. And with this outward arm, again, I'm just imagining our cylinder is just going off here slightly. Again, we've got a bit of that shoulder bump over that curve, meeting up with the arm up there before everything tucks in down here. And following along this line, what I like to do is go from the bottom of our shoulder circles, map a curve over the front, and then understand that the boobs are probably going to grow out of the chest area about here and here in this kind of cross section that we make for ourselves. But coming towards us, a viewer, we're going to get, again, slightly different angles, even if it's relatively voluptuous. So on this one, I'm going to sweep out a bit to the left, something like this. But when I imagine the curve meeting against the rib cage, it's going to flatten against the chest itself, because that's rock solid and the boob's a bit more squishy. So the boob's going to be the one that's going to kind of change to meet that format and just straighten out that line a bit on this edge here. And then when we do the same with this boob here, not going so much off to the side, because this one is kind of off of center, I should say, from the rib cage, but actually coming more or less straight towards us as a viewer. It's coming right for me. So we're just going to get that sweeping as well. And the underside of that boob, again, it's on the body. I'm using a flatter line there to describe where that sits against the body before we've got all of the other curves you're going to see and used to expecting from other angles. And once we've got those kind of boob shapes in place, we can kind of have a line that shows where the front areas of the chest muscles, as well as all of the boobs and bits, actually reach up and meet up in towards the shoulders here, and just like they do as it's going up here. So the front of the chest and the curve of this line goes up to the shoulders, and it's the arms that are actually tucking in underneath the shoulders, or the shoulders I should say are wrapping over the arms to make everything join into the chest. So I'm going to make that arm curve or arm line come all the way in here. I'm just going to indicate where we're catching a bit of the back of the lateral muscles down there, and once again we've got the direction of the limb like so, and we've got the fact that it's going up but maybe ever so slightly towards our direction. So I'm going to just change this curve a little bit more as an inward curve like so, just like that. And on this arm here, maybe a similar thing, slightly curved up in this way that it's going up towards us. Just going to complete that other edge of the arm line there. And remember that with the lateral muscles, probably going to come right out from the back of the shoulder here, and then the lats themselves are going to sweep down and meet nicely in towards the bottom of the rib cage area here. So I've built everything up at the top this time instead of joining in the middle first, but we're just doing the same rules, if not in just a slightly different order. Arm, of course, joining in there. Fantastic. So here's our center line. When we get to the underneath the boobs and the bottom of the rib cage, you do have this fairly strong area here where it's just sitting above the abdominal walls. For this character, we're not going to go too mental on the abs either. I'm just going to indicate that as we go down our center line, we're going to dip in a little bit before we curve out a little bit more over the tummy, which then sweeps back in, still being the front center line, much like we did with the back spine line. But this front center line is going to then sweep in right across the middle, right down to the privates. So here's our other outer edge of a rib cage, and then now let's actually turn this particular zone from our hip line into actual hips. So I'm going to curve a shape up here and a little bit more curve on this side over here, just because of our angle being sideways, to indicate that this is our solid sort of hips area. And then I'm actually going to just think about this tummy line on the outside edge coming down here coming out a bit before it sweeps in. And this kind of area here that I'm describing, kind of connecting the edge of the hips up to the bottom edge of the ribs. This area is our abdominal wall basically, but we're just loosely describing straight down here as well. And then as far as our silhouette's concerned, we've got this sweep of the lats here. Then on this area is going to be, as mentioned, where our obliques are for our character, and then everything else gets to meet up quite nicely down for the hips. So up and in and out and down, and then along the bottom, if I just pop the legs down here and down here for now, then imagine that from your hips zone, about halfway up that height, is where we get to really sweep down towards the center, getting those curves in to indicate with the whole torso and everything, V's right down to the privates at the bottom, and then we can start to imagine our legs coming off as well. With our outside edge of our thick thighs characters, it is from about this halfway point as well, but we kind of grow that curve out. We make it about as thick as it's going to get, just up here slightly, before it then sweeps down, goes off to actually become the knee. So let's get that down there. I'm just going to do very similar up here. And I'm doing my best not to rotate the paper and keep everything fairly straight on so it still sits within the view for you guys, so to speak. But it does mean my lines do get a little bit rough sometimes depending on the angle that we're drawing. Similar thing over here. I'm having the leg just drop straight off down this side, just like so. But on the inside edge of this leg, although we're making things relatively thick, I'm actually going to put a bit of line that curves up on this inside edge, and imagine that a lot of this zone here is actually just catching the inside edge of the bum. In fact, I'll probably make that line less strongly curving in there, but do be aware that this zone here, you are going to catch a bit of inside cheek from that sort of angle. And then obviously we've got from where the abdominal wall comes in, you can imagine that being a little bit of a curve that sort of finishes as a tummy area zone there. Only recently learned the word fupa from watching H3 podcasts. But then we've got privates down there, and you can always imagine that the top part of the surface of the leg does actually sort of split out a bit, in that we can go from the middle front area of where the leg joins onto the hips on either side, and actually, instead of mapping that line straight in, curve that right towards the inside here. And this is kind of actually then to a degree, and then up round here to show the very center circle of all your characters is right in the core chakra center. And then this side as well, this curve sweeps down on this inside edge. And what that's helping us to kind of understand is that these massive big front muscles of the leg, where you get all your squats in and so on, do kind of sweep and spread out around the side. There's sort of four main bunchings before they go to the knee. But we're not going to get too technical because I'm throwing a whole load of information at you guys anyway right now. So do not worry yourselves. And again, guys, we're just going to talk about that mapping. So I would just imagine that we've got our lines that come up here where the shoulders are, and I'm going to map right over the front of this particular boob just so that I understand its surface area, coming down the top towards the front and then curving back in on the underside. Very similar thing here. Our shoulders actually raised up with this arm, so this line's kind of squeezing in there, then mapping down and around over the surface. This boob's obviously pointing away from us, so it's sweeping right down off of here before coming back and under again, and then X marks the spot, so to speak. Oh, sorry, I've lost my words there. X marks the spot, so to speak, for the nipples, but obviously you can't draw them in because it's not safe for YouTube, even though YouTube demonetizes all my videos anyway. So follow that X around there, and again, here's that curve, and again, there's that sweeping round surface area. So by doing that, by thinking of all these things, even with our thighs down here and imagining, okay, because of our low angle, these are coming towards us a little bit, so I'm going to just apply a bit of a cross curve just to tell myself what's happening with the surface of this leg, up like so. And then this one maybe not quite so much, so maybe this leg's a little further away, actually coming away from the body. I could map it that way instead, just to show that this one's in particular is heading off. And doing that mapping, even though you end up with often a very busy image, something like this, if you're doing that very lightly at your draft work stage, it's going to help you out massively. So that's the idea that I'm talking about. You guys, however, are always asking after loads of examples, so I'm going to do my best to fit, don't know if we're going to fit two, I'm probably just going to fit one more example in over here. It's more of the same, but basically so that you guys have plenty to reference from. And don't forget, guys, I now on my Patreon include all of the reference images that we do here on the tutorials for as little as $1. So on this one here, let's have a character maybe leaning in a bit and maybe legs spread as well, just to kind of get a lot of detail going on the inside area around here. So again, I'm going to imagine that I've got a shoulder line up here, and then my character is going to fill up most of this particular space before we get to the hips, around about here. And again, that means our rough chest egg-shaped ellipse is down here. And again, I'm being quite choppy and quick with these construction lines. The point is to make this tutorial, I know they do get a bit long, but the point is to make this tutorial as quick as possible, not as beautiful as possible. I've got a shoulder circle coming off here, and another one up here, and then we've got the whole bucket hips area down here, relatively wide, with those female characters in a female form that we're just talking about in particular today and mapping the curves of. Those hips at least as wide as the shoulders, as a very, very general rule. Obviously everybody's physically different, that's the magic of being a human being, but in terms of very rough rules for drawing curvy, more sensual characters, that's certainly something that I like to have in mind. So nice and wide there, and then I can start to imagine, okay, well, if we've got the neck coming off of this particular body around about here for the character, and this is weirdly really hard to draw in when you're not actually giving your character a head. It feels really, really strange for this headless chicken look. The lats coming in just there, and then with a little bit of tilt towards us, it means that I'm just going to pop the collarbone line a little bit lower than when I've started this shoulder line, down about here, and just show that this is going to reach up towards the shoulders here and here. You might just indicate a little bit of neckline up there, and then down the front, down here. And because of the angle towards us, instead of a really high curve on this chest, I'm going to just make it ever so slightly more shallow, just to indicate that tilt in, just to see what that does for us as we build up this character. So we can go ahead and just understand that, right, I'm going to straighten up a little bit here and a little bit here, and with these hips, I do think that they actually follow this curve in terms of the center line of the body, so I'm going to go ahead and just get that up here, and then understand that this curve is probably going to pinch a bit over here, so don't be scared to get a tiny bit of bulge or lateral fat pinch with some of your characters, whatever you want to call it. It's only going to make it more real, because as you lean forward, that's like the least flattering look that you can get. That's when you get some lovely rolls out of your own tummy. Get a bloody good handful of tummy if you give yourself a lean forward. Now underneath these shoulder lines again, curving this way to indicate the surface area of that chest, and then imagining that our boobs are going to sort of very vaguely come out of these zones here, and I'm going to then just have that maybe just hang a little bit. I don't want it to obscure too much, so we won't make them too crazy big, but they'll certainly be, let's say, a healthy proportion. So I'm going to curve the underside of this one here, just like so, and bring that back up towards here. And when it comes to the boobs and thinking about how they map to the chest, you can still imagine that really vague teardrop shape to show that with most unencumbered boobs. But these are tears of joy, of course. And then very similar on here, but again I've got a tiny bit of angle, so I'm going to let this one just come off out to the side just to keep it all mixed up, like so. Then sweeping back in like this. Obviously we'll be drawing things maybe a little bit more circular, maybe a little bit more pushed up if we were drawing a character that was wearing sort of like a supporting element, like a bra or a tight top, for example. But this we're just going to have just hang loose for a little bit and chill out. Vague shape up there as well. Here's our center line down the middle of the chest, and then these areas under here, if I imagine still the center line, might still tuck in a little bit, but actually then it's pretty much, because this is towards us, gonna bulge out, because we're gonna have some hip with some spread legs. So don't get too excited, guys, because we are keeping this completely safe for work, despite what YouTube thinks. Get that tummy area mapped in. We've got a bottom edge of our ribcage stuff happening down here, and then bulging a bit because of how we're looking at things on this angle. And that sweep down towards the middle or towards the genitals isn't a curve this way. Just wanted to indicate it's going to be that way, just because of our angles and just because it better describes essentially the whole joint of the leg into the hip zone when you have your legs for your characters apart. So I've got this inverted curve instead sweeping down there. I've got a similar thing that I'm keeping in mind down here, so like this and like this. And the legs aren't perfectly stuck together in the middle. There is, of course, space for the privates. So if we imagine ourselves coming down around the front and the abdominal area essentially stopping around about there, then the area for the privates under here, you do want to imagine that actually it's still relatively flat going down, and then right underneath the bowl of the hips and the shape that makes that up, that's where the kind of surface direction changes and then sweeps underneath. Now you don't really need to map it out too perfectly, you can just get away with putting clothes on your characters, that's going to solve it. But if I imagine each leg just coming out and slightly towards us, and we're not going to fit too much of these legs in, guys, from how big I've drawn this, but you can certainly go ahead and say, right, if this leg's coming towards me, I'm going to imagine just some cylinders which are coming in our direction. So I'm going to have a really big area up here, maybe most of this joint from about this part coming out towards us like so. I'm going to go ahead and sweep underneath and up to make that work. And we're going to keep something in mind. Much like we had the arms coming out here and the shoulders going over them, we've got the legs coming out, but there's going to be a bit of bum that we're going to see kind of wrapping around things as well. Now we've got the top part of the thigh of this character up here as well, so that one's going to just sweep back in for us. This is our kind of surface curve, so to speak, but it's probably going to be our flat on very end part of the character as well. So we could almost just continue that and just say, okay, that's now a flat surface towards us, our flat edge. Up here is again where we've got this main meeting point where all of those kind of muscle groups are coming in. So this is always going to be a fairly strong, solid surface area up in the front. Up on the inside, you do have a few groin muscles and bits that kind of pull everything together on the inside part of the legs. You don't have to overdo it, but you can certainly just indicate that around about here, there's different parts of the muscles just pulling in, like so. And that if we were going to just kind of map the curve here, there's a bit of a bump where these guys are working hard, just like that, before we come over to the rest of the surface. Again, we make things quite busy by doing these extra lines, but it really does help out. Then similar leg coming off on this direction, so no biggie. I'm just going to sweep out over here, kind of cut that leg off right about here, sweep out over the top as well. And do remember, guys, I have plenty of drawing tutorials on the actual faces for your anime and manga characters from different angles and different positions as well. That's the only reason why we don't need to worry about that right now. This isn't some super subtle metatextual message that women are only valued by their bodies. That's culture's and society's fault, not mine. And obviously, you know, there's love in my heart, so please don't think I'm a chauvinist. That being said and gotten out of the way, let's make this as sexy as possible. So we've got another line that comes up here and out there, just for these inner leg muscles all pulling in. So again, the whole point is to map that surface and understand, right, here's my curve then. Actually, I need to describe that that's bulging a bit just because there's something else pulling and doing something over there before we sweep nicely over the top of the thigh at the front there. And then as we come up to things here, these areas of this joint are where we just tend to get harder lines come in to indicate that obviously we've got a complete surface direction change as we come down here, and also a little bit harder of a line here as we come down here. Surface direction change being the top edge here, suddenly of the skin going directly 90 degrees up to actually be the rest of the body and the torso. And as we come down here as well, similar story. And what I was saying, there we go, recovered, about the underside of a bum. So we've got the front of a privates here. The actual private area is kind of a bit more kind of back and underneath. And then because of how this character is kind of sitting, we're actually going to get a nice bit of bum just squeezed and flattened in, meeting up towards the middle here and meeting up towards the middle there. So when it comes to your characters and their legs and the way that you're drawing them, the legs are always a little bit separated. Now you can make your characters extra curvy so it looks like they're squeezed together, but the only real bits that really meet up are the bum cheeks. That's the kind of bit to remember. So again, we know what this zone is under there, but we're not going to focus on it to make it safe. And then if I just get a very similar thing with some arms on this character, we'll just stick one down here, have one down there. So I'm going to understand that, okay, I've got my arm tube here and my arm tube here, just those simple cylindrical shapes as ever, 1 and 2. And I've got the shoulders as well, coming over this shoulder muscle curve, curving a lot at the top, but straightening out as they go down the side. One there, and another. And again, I'm keeping these lines relatively rough, just down there. And the way that the chest meets up into the shoulder is that you get a lot of skin wrinkle right here, just because of everything flattened and tucked down, like so. But again, we're going to take a really quick moment just to understand that, right, this shoulder right here is sweeping down there, kind of joins into the arm into a point. We're obviously looking side on, which tells us that our bicep zone is what we're getting from this particular angle. Here's the center line of all of this part of the arm as it goes up, like so. And then a really similar story down on this side as well. All of this is actually working really hard down there. Then you've got your arm going off, doing whatever it wants to do off in the distance. And again, if we just map this boob, this one's pretty much front on. So I'm just going to go just like that. And coming down this part of the chest, this one's a little bit more side on. So we map that surface, map the curve of the body. We can see a bit more sweep inwards from that particular angle. And then if we just go a little bit downwards to show the curve of that one there. And then similar story on this side here before we sweep off to the side. And again, you've got this front surface area that's coming all the way in, fairly flat, but then tucking much further under. Then you've got the bum area right underneath. And if you've got your legs spread and coming out towards us, the best way is to just actually imagine that they're coming straight out towards the kneecaps, which are quite near you. We haven't quite got the space for that here, and we're going to do a completely different tutorial about characters sitting down anyway, which is going to look after those leg areas quite nicely. So that's basically it, guys. I hope you found this to be useful. We've just been talking about using the basic building blocks as ever to build up the female body, but to help you understand it more, to help you change this design in future and to help you map the shadows, lighting area, or even just the surface of clothing when you're going to put that on and the patterns that your clothings might actually get. It's really useful sometimes to map the surface curves, map the curves of your female character bodies. And it's going to make you understand, oh, why does this suddenly look more voluptuous? Well, it was just a plain thigh earlier. Maybe if I just put maybe some sort of stockings or garter hose going on there, I can create a texture or material that actually has these curves to them. And the more curves you've got, the better in my book. So guys, what I'm going to do is drop into a tiny bit of time lapse, only really just to tidy up these lines and firm things up a bit, and then we'll be right back to say goodbye. And yeah guys, welcome back. So hopefully that really just firms up these lines to really firm up the idea of what I'm trying to go on about today. Sure, you can use these simple lines and basic building block shapes to build up the form of your character, but it is very, very helpful, especially on voluptuous, curvy female characters and all sorts of other objects in general when you're drawing, to understand what's happening in the surface. So we've got areas where the arms go into the shoulders, go into the shoulder blades, the scapular group, go into the areas of the traps, which meet into the areas of the lats of the back. And if you can understand where these separate areas are doing all of this, you understand where all of these bumps and flows and niches of these different parts of the bodies are going to catch light, throw shadow, and all sorts of other bits. Then where the hips and waist meet in, understanding how the kind of meat of the glutes goes up and meets into the hips and what's going on there, as well as where, say, the underside of a rib cage might meet down into the abdominal wall, which becomes its own thing. And very equally, especially with the tummy area, understanding the front center line of your character. If you can map in your head where that center line is with the bumps and curves of the body, all those little nuances, it's gonna help your artwork massively. Exact same thing with the curve of the spine on the other side. And also here, just throwing some different angles for the chest and the hips. We've thrown the bucket of the hips tilted back a bit, just so that we can get a different example of a spread-led character and understand how those hips, how those legs are meeting into the hip section. We've done hips tutorials before, so of course check out the playlist, but I don't think we had like a wide leg example in there to actually talk about as well. So thank you very much for watching guys. I really hope you found this tutorial for mapping the curves and surfaces of the female body to be useful for your own artwork at home. Of course, if you did, make sure that you get in the comment section, let me know. Don't be scared to tell me what you want to see in the future. Give this video a like and make sure, of course, you've subscribed if you haven't already for more down the line. And let me give a great big shout out to last month's higher tier patrons, including Antoine M, Nyane, Mohammed TA, Divas Charms, Brandon W, Jared, Breton F, Blue Purdue, Plaguish, Anthony C, H Caution, NASA A, Claytus, Redneck, Sheik's Apprentice, Admiral Okmar, A Whisper to a Roar, Avarice, Panda Boy, Mark W, Carlos R, Lane D, Chibanobi, Samba M, Sergio H, Purity Rain, Michael C, Brandon S, Dante Norm, Mr. Mooney, Sumweeb, Nezrin B, Joji, Daniel J, Elvin, Shisho, Michael S, Aaron B, Delivery Wolf, Jason W, Alex B, Zero, Demal Maximus, Cuddlebum, The Travelling Wolf, Ethereal, Joe R, Mad Duck, Garrett C, Ryder2KX, Michael S, Trent H, Jorgen A, Luke C, Johnny T, Connor M, Julio Felix O, Rob, Kamari J, Jamie, Cache Commando, Mizzino, Grizzly, Mr. Turtle, Matthew G, Simon B, Gareth, Taylor S, Kenneth J H, Homongchi L, Angry H, Johnny Y, Ollie, Garrett, Immoral Muffin, Christian L, Tokiko K, Timothy B, Minion715, Ken E, Wendell S, Zahaki, Fatness, Kurt D, Natasha G, and LMA Gamer. Guys, thank you so much. That list is an absolute mouthful these days, but bear in mind, we've had those recent changes to how my Patreon works. These are our higher tier patrons from last month. Next month, I'll be reading out and shouting the names of this month's patrons, where you'll probably find that list is a lot more contracted and shorter. But of course, guys, if you are ever curious about Patreon, which is basically the whole reason this all happens, for me to make free drawing tutorials on YouTube, and you want to just investigate or get some of the rewards, including this very drawing reference sheet, then follow the links in the description below. Other than that, guys, let me know what's going on in the future, and I'll see you next time. Take care.